Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
It's time to turn off the lights and turn on the dark.
Chilling tales for dark nights.
Good evening, listener. You're listening to Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. On tonight's edition, we invite you to leave behind your safe reality and descend with us into the frightening depths of the most terrifying imaginations with audio adaptations of frightening fiction about haunting holidays and eerie events. I'm your host, Steve Taylor. And tonight I'll be your guide as we traverse the dimly lit corridors of your darkest dreams. I also wanted to take a moment to thank you for all your donations. Every share, donation, and comment of support helps. Let's keep building this together. Joining us tonight to help bring to life the frightening fiction of Dominic Eagle and Sam Morris, our voice talents Kevin Barbare, Heather Thomas, Erik Peabody, Geoff Sturtevant, myself Steve Taylor, Beth Gadow, and Olivia Steele. Now, get your ticket ready, take your seat in our theater of the minds, and brace yourself. It's time to turn off the lights and turn on the dark. Our first tale this evening is written by Dominic Eagle and performed by Kevin Barbare, Heather Thomas, Erik Peabody, Geoff Sturtevant, and myself, Steve Taylor. In a town haunted by the memory of Halloween horrors, the residents try to forget the unspeakable events of that night. But whispers of the traitor remind them that true nightmares never really end. Now, without further ado, I present to you The Traitor.
Halloween is a taboo word in my town. Has been for the past 8 years. To me, it's October 31st, just a day like any other. We should keep it that way, for crying out loud. The people of my town have placed too much significance on it. That was what Donald Cree wanted. To join the unhallowed halls of mankind's most heinous killers, a legend derived from an 80s slasher flick. I refuse to give him that satisfaction. He's a man, a monstrous one, but a man named Donald Cree. Everyone else calls him the Traitor. On that Monday evening in 2016, I came home from work around 5ish, a little earlier than usual because I was on trick-or-treat duty with the children. Well, I was always on trick-or-treat duty, and I had no qualms about that. Halloween, once upon a time, was a festive occasion in my household, perhaps more so for my children and me, as Maria was always more of a Christmas girl.
November 1st?
My wife said with a grin.
All of these cobwebs are coming down, Tim, and the tree's going up.
The tree is not going up until December 1st, I said. Maria sighed.
Why did I have to marry a goth?
I laughed. Shut up, you dingbat. You wear more black than me. Anyway, don't you enjoy seeing the kids have fun? Maria snorted as our two preteens fiddled with their costumes.
They're just buzzing to be getting an excessive sugar fix. They'll be exactly the same at Christmas.
I'm going to ask Mrs. Graham for double the chocolate this year,
Freddie said, slipping a set of vampire fangs into his mouth.
Seeing as it's my last hurrah.
I brayed with laughter. You're so dramatic. I'm not banning you from trick-or-treating next year, Freddie. Look, You're already a month away from turning 13. Next Halloween, you might struggle to find friends who want to go with you. That's all.
Seb and Mike are more excited about it than me.
My son scoffed. Sure, I said, nodding. But I'm talking about next year, Freddie. Seb's already 13, isn't he? Nearly 14. The three of you will be entirely different people. Just enjoy tonight. But accept that the next time you trick-or-treat, you might be my age.
You're just as dramatic as your son,
Maria teased, before playfully shoving me.
This isn't his last day on Earth, Tim. Let our son decide whether or not he wants to go next year.
Yeah, that's a lifetime away anyway.
Fred added before sticking out his tongue at me.
You'll still take me trick-or-treating though, right?
11-year-old Lily asked. Of course I hadn't forgotten you, darling, I promised, ruffling the girl's hair.
Sam's already forgotten,
she said dejectedly. My daughter's usual trick-or-treat buddy, Samantha, hadn't returned any of her texts. She was a little upset about the whole thing. We'll pass by her house on the way, I promised. Her phone battery's probably died or something. Don't worry. We'll get Sam to tag along. The pouting child nodded and anxiously twiddled a loose lock of brunette hair. Then she adjusted the crown atop her head. A king's crown. Lily was very clear about that. She was not a princess, not a queen. She was a king.
Are you going to get the show on the road then?
Maria asked as she checked her watch.
It's getting close to tea time, Tim.
Nice alliteration, I said. Yes, we'll set off for now. Got to get to Mrs. Graham's house before all the good chocolate has gone. My wife rolled her eyes, then turned her gaze to our daughter.
Lily, make sure Mrs. Graham doesn't give your father any chocolate this time.
Lily nodded and I huffed, turning to face Freddie. There's a gender war in this household, lad. Right, let's go, ghouls. Our street isn't really a street at all, not in the sense of a quaint, contained neighborhood. It's a main road lined with houses. And that once made Halloween all the more fun for me. My family lived at the heart of the action. Every Halloween, I would step out of that house with Freddie and Lily to find dozens of other children and tag-along parents filling the town's pavements. The place never felt more alive to me. Not even at Christmas, the time of year Maria was desperately manifesting.
Seb!
Freddie shouted.
Mike!
My boy ran towards our gate, finding his two best friends ready and waiting. I felt sorry for Lily, as the absence of Samantha was certainly felt. Seb had come as some superhero I didn't recognize. Mike, much like every other year, was dressed as Michael Myers, a joke that always made me chuckle, though Maria often connected that the boy was far too young to have seen the Halloween films. The boys' fathers, Stanley and Philip, were standing behind the two giddy trick-or-treaters. Stanley, Seb's father, wore a Superman cape. Philip, Mike's father, wore the same wig he wore every year. He was supposed to be Jamie Lee Curtis. I didn't really see it. The wig never lasted more than 3 or 4 houses, as Philip always claimed it became too itchy. He just found it amusing to compliment his son's outfit. The 7 of us followed the main road and bounced from house to house.
Is Lily's friend not up for it this year?
Stanley asked me. Samantha? She's got a cold, I replied. Poor Lily has to tolerate those 3 gremlins on her own.
Hey,
Philip objected sternly.
One gremlin. My Mike. Freddie and Seb are fine.
The 3 of us chuckled and drew mortified looks from our children. It was a sharp reminder that, as mere chaperones, the following fathers should be neither seen nor heard.
What costume is that, Tim?
Stanley asked, nodding at my smart white shirt and trousers.
Have you come straight from work?
I gasped. What costume is this? Are you kidding? I tapped the red Sean name badge pinned to my upper pocket, and Stanley leaned forward, squinted, still looked utterly empty in the eyes. Philip snorted.
He's a grandpa, Tim. Ignore him. Shaun of the Dead was after his time.
I'm only a few years older than you whippersnappers,
Stanley insisted. You're in your 40s, I pointed out. That makes you significantly older.
You're all old,
Freddie piped up, having eavesdropped on the grown-ups' conversation. The 4 children snickered, and I shot a disbelieving look at both Stanley and Philip. Reckon we should just turn around now? I asked my fellow chaperones. Seems like the kids don't want to go trick-or-treating this year. The other fathers nodded, and the children began to protest firmly. I often daydream about what would have happened if I'd treated that threat seriously. So much would have changed. Awful things would have still happened, no doubt, but not to us. And maybe, just maybe, that would have changed everything. Not for the town as a whole, but for the 7 of us. However, none of that happened. Instead, I let a broad grin loose, showing Freddy that I'd got my revenge for his troublesome tongue. The boy scowled before returning to his conversation with the other children.
Did you hear about Barbara Thomas, Tim?
Stanley asked as our children bounded up to Mrs. Graham's door.
Don't.
Philip demanded.
Why now?
Asked Stanley.
Just don't.
Philip said.
He doesn't need to know.
Well, you've got to tell me now, I said. Stanley hailed Philip and me back at the gate, whilst Mrs. Graham shoveled chocolate bars into the 4 children's wiggling baskets.
All right. I'll tell you whilst we're out of earshot, and I'll make it quick.
Stanley said.
In short, Barbara's come under fire from some folk in town because she fired Gertrude Cree.
I gasped. Mrs. Cree? The librarian? She's been working there since
we were kids.
Stanley finished, nodding.
She must be in her 90s.
Philip said.
The library's all she has. I'm on the angry mob's side.
Stanley frowned.
Well, it's not that simple, Philip, is it?
What do you mean? I asked. Stanley sighed.
It's got something to do with Gertrude's son, Donald. See, Barbara wasn't just Gertrude's manager. They were close friends, had been for about 30 years. But apparently, Gertrude showed Barbara something about her son earlier this week, and that something got her fired.
What did she show her? I asked, interest piqued. Stanley shook his head, nodding at the 4 children who were walking back towards us.
Not suitable for little ears.
When we reached the house of Samantha Frankson, the adults waited at another gate for Lily to fetch her friend. Then Stanley continued the story.
Drawings,
he said.
Gertrude Cree showed Barbara some of her son's drawings.
I raised an eyebrow. Isn't Donald Cree about 60? Seems a little old to be making pictures for his mother. Is he an artist?
Nope.
Philip laughed. I shrugged. Whatever, I don't see what's so controversial about all of this.
Neither Barbara nor Gertrude will tell anyone what was drawn,
Stanley said.
We just know it was something awful.
Come on, I said, nodding at the kids. They're still far away. Tell us. Stanley shook his head.
I mean it. I've told you everything, Tim. I just didn't want the children to ask questions. Didn't want them to mention any of this to kids at school, either. You know what this town's like. Word travels fast.
Especially with gossips like us to spread the gospel,
Philip said. Stanley rolled his eyes.
Despite Philip's implication, this isn't mindless gossip. There was a reason for bringing it up, Tim. I really think we should skip the Cree household this year.
Why? I asked. Philip took over from Stanley.
Donald was working down at the scrapyard, but he moved back in with his mother earlier this year. Got fired. I heard he's off the medication again.
I sighed. I really thought he'd finally pulled himself together. I always liked Mrs. Cree, and she seemed so much happier after he eventually moved out, you know? I know he only moved to the other side of town, but still, I'd give my own skin to not live in the same house as him. Philip nodded.
I just remember when we drove her wild by showing her the naughtiest books we could find in the library.
Exactly,
Stanley said.
And according to Kath, Mrs. Cree hasn't been dealing well with her son's return. Now she doesn't even have the library to take her away from him.
Remember when he answered the door instead of her one Halloween? I asked. We were only little. He must have been in his 20s. And he gave us scraps of cardboard instead of sweets. Philip sighed.
Man, what I would give to see these drawings. What did Donald draw to make Barbara Thomas fire her closest friend?
It's none of our business,
Stanley insisted.
I only mentioned it so Tim would understand why we should skip the Cree house this year.
It doesn't have to be uncomfortable, I said. And think about it. This is more of a reason to visit her house. Mrs. Cree will be devastated about losing her lifelong position at the library. Surely she'll want to see some familiar faces. We'd be cheering her up. Stanley frowned.
Let's just have a think about it whilst we walk around, shall we?
I agreed, noting Lily's downtrodden expression as she and her friends returned to say that after a minute or two of unsuccessful knocking, there had been no reply from any of the Franksons. I probably wouldn't have thought too much of simply skipping the Cree house without an explanation. The fathers often started to tire towards the end of the trick-or-treating circuit, so I was never opposed to hurrying things up. Anything to stop my limbs from turning a vibrant shade of purple, but Stanley had ruined everything. By telling me about Mrs. Cree's situation, he'd filled me with deep empathy for the woman. Gertrude Cree was a librarian, not by trade, but by spirit. The woman once cleared out her attic of old children's books and gave them away for free at my high school. The library was her life. It had been stripped for her by, in my eyes, a malignant manager. I didn't know Barbara well, but anybody who had the guts to turf out sweet Mrs. Cree was a rotten egg in my book. Now, however, I understand that Donald Cree's drawings must have held twisted secrets. Given what I saw and learnt on that evening in 2016, I have my suspicions as to the content of his art. Suspicions that I'd rather not have confirmed one way or the other.
Wait 1 second, Seb.
Stanley told his son as he reached towards Mrs. Cree's gate.
I still think it'd be better for everyone if we skip this house. Philip, Tim, what do you two think? What if Donald answers?
Philip shrugged.
Then he answers. We're not kids anymore, Stan. You don't have to be scared of him.
I'm not scared of him.
Stanley growled in protest. The 4 children watched their parents with puzzled faces, having missed the context of our earlier conversation. No worries, Stanley, I said. We'll skip the—
Hello,
called a voice from the Cree porch. The 7 of us, clustered awkwardly on the pavement outside Mrs. Cree's gate, turned to face the source of the man's voice. Turned to find Donald Cree, the 60-something-year-old man who stood in the open doorway of his mother's home. Over the last decade, I'd only seen him once or twice around town, often donning a luminous vest and somber features. It was strange to see the man with not only a full head of gray hair, but Halloween garbs. Even as a child, when I'd seen him loitering in the upstairs window of his childhood home, Donald had never entered into the festivity of the season, had never worn a costume. Yet, there he stood, an old man wearing a black trench coat that shrouded his form. Shrouded everything other than the smiling face, caked in numerous layers of muddy orange paint. His head emerged from the coat like a disembodied tumor.
are you just going to stand there?
Donald asked us loudly. The children looked up at their parents hopefully, but the 3 of us frowned in response.
Well, we have to do it now.
Stanley muttered angrily.
Go on, kids.
He'd barely finished the sentence before the 4 children burst through the gate and bounded up the pavement.
Want to stay here, little Stan?
Philip teased as we walked through the gate. Stanley groaned.
Let's just do this. The guy gives me the creeps.
Dad, look.
Lily said, pointing at the lawn ornament of a plastic skeleton wearing a red cloak.
That's the kind of robe I wanted to look like royalty.
You're the most regal lady I've ever seen, I said. King Lily.
Hello, children.
Donald Cree roared loudly as the 7 of us gathered on his doorstep.
My, there are a lot of you here today. Wonderful, simply wonderful.
Trick or treat!
The 4 kids announced in near harmony. Donald smiled awfully, locking his gaze onto the children, but seeming not to notice the 3 adults behind.
Why, what a question. What a question indeed. Well, first of all, do you know what they call me, children?
Lily uttered a meek,
No?
The treater.
Donald whispered. I raised an eyebrow at the 2 men beside me. I'd never seen Donald Cree dress up before, and I'd been trick-or-treating with Freddie for at least 8 or 9 years. Maybe I'd simply missed some period of time during which the old man dressed up as this elusive treater, but it didn't ring any bells. And judging by the looks on my friends' faces, they'd never heard word of this name either. None of us knew who'd been calling Donald Cree by such an odd name. Just him, I'd imagine, I thought.
Where are your treats?
Mike asked the man, his question half muffled by a white mask.
Michael.
Philip yelled.
Sorry, Mr. McCree. He's not usually this rude. He must be channeling his character, you know?
Donald then offered Philip a twisted smile. Something diabolical squatted behind those pencil-thin lips. Not a human emotion. No, it was far too uneven for that. It was a look that looked wrong, yet clearly exactly as Mr. Cree had intended. The man hadn't found Philip's joke amusing in any way, shape, or form, but it was worse than that. Donald didn't look upset, didn't look angry. There was no discernible emotion behind the grin on his rigid, upturned lips. I called it a twisted smile, but I lied, for it was not a smile at all.
We all like to play pretend sometimes, Philip.
Donald said softly. My friend became uncharacteristically silent, and I understood why. I was certain that Donald Cree had no reason to know Philip's name. He was 2 decades older than us. We hadn't mingled in the same circles at school. Donald hadn't mingled in any circles. He lived his own ring of hell, one of unknown contents, such as art wretched enough to terrify a library manager, wretched enough to rob his mother of her lifelong career.
Sir, may we have some treats, please?
Seb asked politely. Donald turned back to the children and began to chuckle.
Ha 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 ha, treats, sweets, and chocolate, that sort of thing.
The children shrugged awkwardly. They were young, but sharp enough to know that something was peculiar about this man. Donald neither talked nor acted as other adults did. The problem was deeper than that, of course. Our children sensed what Philip, Stanley, and I had sensed when we were young. All people have an aura. Good, bad, warm, cold, confident, awkward. But Donald Cree's aura hovered either sideways or below any air of awkwardness or wrongness. His aura was a darkness unto itself. There had always been something petrifying about the man. Philip and I never admitted that. We'd long teased Stanley for fearing Donald, but we felt it too. He wasn't a man broken by something. He'd been born wrong. After a long period of silence, I said, "It's okay, Mr. Cree. We're sorry for bothering you."
Nonsense, gentlemen,
replied the white-faced man, and I felt strangely comforted that he hadn't used my name, even if he'd known it.
I am the treater. You don't earn a name like that by offering sugar. Come, won't you?
The man stood aside, motioning for us to enter his home. The Cree residence looked unwelcoming. Mrs. Cree would typically appear in a well-lit hallway holding a basket of goodies for the children, but she was nowhere to be seen. In fact, there was nothing at all to be seen in the unlit lobby. Donald Cree was inviting us into the dark recesses of his house. I instinctively gripped the shoulders of Freddie and Lily before they blindly dipped their toes into that black pool. "Is your mother home?" I shakily asked Donald. "I've not seen her since this time last year, I'm ashamed to say." I was hoping to say hello. Mr. Cree suddenly narrowed his eyes into slits, but no emotion spilled out of those empty spheres. He eventually said,
"She's not home."
What treat are you offering, Donald?
Stanley asked uncertainly.
Is it a haunted house? Do we have to go inside? We really need to get home soon, you see. Seb's not had his dinner.
You'll be done before dinner.
The man whispered as he beckoned again.
Screw it.
Philip said, ushering Mike inside.
Let's do this.
He wasn't saying it aloud, but I knew my friend was simply hoping to bring the whole family ordeal to a close. And I have to say that I shared his sentiment, so I followed Philip and Mike with Freddie and Lily. Stanley wisely waited in the doorway with a disappointed Seb. We didn't know what we were doing. If we'd known, we wouldn't have entered. Donald Cree had lived in that town all of his life, had lived with his mother for most of his life. 60-something years. Yes, he had a reputation as an oddball, but he seemed harmless. We were wrong. I expected, much like Stanley, that Donald set up some makeshift haunted house, perhaps intended to frighten the grown-ups he'd so enjoyed tormenting when they were children. I didn't expect that mentally the man had matured much since his 20s. And given the stories I'd heard, Donald was just as horrific before I was born. Teachers were unsettled by the little tyrant's disposition. After what happened on that All Hallows Eve, they must have finally understood why.
Donald?
Philip asked, stopping at the doorway to the darkened kitchen. What's wrong? I asked. Mike asked in a muffled whisper.
Why is it so dark in here?
Because I'm setting things up,
came Donald's voice from the darkness. Then followed not one, but a series of crackles. A flash of light erupted from the kitchen table at the far right of the room. However, the roar of flames was quickly trounced by the deafening scream of a tortured woman sitting in one of the dining chairs. The 5 of us who'd braved the walk into that house found ourselves eyeing an unholy sight. The ignited body of Mrs. Cree. We would later learn that Donald had drugged his mother with sleeping pills. She was awoken by the unimaginable agony of her very flesh tearing under a blanket of fire. Scorching fire. flames which raged at hundreds upon hundreds of degrees. I'll never forget the look on her face, the wide-mouthed shriek on her red, peeling face half robbed of skin. It rivaled that of the gleeful grin on Donald Cree's face, a grin illuminated by the flames which licked the room. He had not only orchestrated an act of unfathomable horror, but cherry-picked some unwitting trick-or-treaters to witness the awful spectacle. Why us? Why not any of the earlier trick-or-treaters? I still don't know, just as I don't know why Donald Cree said what he said next, whilst raising a fresh match in one hand and a red canister of gasoline in the other.
Who will be treated next?
He asked, taking quick steps to the side. Lily screamed first, and I realized whilst watching Mrs. Cree burn, I had ignored the 4 other people tied to dining chairs, each one slumping forwards, clearly drugged in the same way. And it wasn't the noise that woke each of the gasoline-drenched victims. It was, much as it had been for Mrs. Cree, the fire. We could have done something. Should have done something. But Philip and I only thought of our children. The 5 of us ran, meeting a perplexed Stanley and Sebastian at the front door. We ran and screamed for help, drawing the attention of the town's many trick-or-treaters, more perplexed folk who seemed unable to distinguish our incoherent, overlapping cries. By the time the police arrived, Donald Cree was long gone. He left only the charred bodies of Mrs. Cree and the Franksons behind, the marks of his hellish night. Again, why the Franksons? Nobody knows. Nobody knows why, after 60 years of little more than oddball behavior, the man became a murderer. Part of me fears that, perhaps, his mother might not have been the first. Given that Donald Cree has still not been found, the townsfolk live in fear every year that Samantha Frankson, the last to be burnt, may not be the last forever.
This episode of Chilling Tales for Dark Nights is brought to you by Mr. Ballin. I know how you like your stories, listeners. You like them strange, dark, and mysterious. You want to hear something so crazy it's almost impossible to believe. Well, on Mr. Ballin, you'll get just that. The difference is the stories are actually true. Have you ever heard about the woman who woke up in a cold sweat like she just had a nightmare, but she knew what she saw while she was sleeping was more than just a bad dream? Or the violinist who disappeared from the orchestra pit in front of thousands of people in the audience? Or when a mark left behind at a crime scene led investigators to wonder if there were devil-worshipping occultists prowling their rural community? Well, the Mr. Ballin podcast, Strange, Dark, and Mysterious Stories, brings you these tales and plenty more like them. The Mr. Ballin podcast is brought to you by a man who's experienced authentic horror in his own life, a Navy SEAL turned storyteller who survived a near-death experience in Afghanistan. And since 2022, Mr. Ballin has been regaling his listeners with the strangest, darkest, and most mysterious tales you've ever heard. For true crime fans, Mr. Ballin is a no-brainer, folks. I'm a listener myself. These stories are sensational. It's well-researched and nicely produced, and each episode will have you hanging on every word. Seriously. Mr. Ballin has this unique ability to keep you balanced on the edge of life and death. In short, I recommend it. Sometimes truth is stranger than fiction, folks, and you'll find proof of that on the Mr. Ballin podcast. It's horror the most authentic way you can get it. For real. Follow Mr. Ballin Podcast, Strange, Dark, and Mysterious Stories on Amazon Music or wherever you get your podcasts. Prime members can listen early and ad-free on the Amazon Music app. Thanks for your support and for supporting our valuable sponsors. I hope you enjoyed The Treater, as written by Dominic and performed by Kevin Barbare, Heather Thomas, Erik Peabody, Geoff Sturtevant, and myself, Steve Taylor. Our second tale of the evening is written by Sam Morris and is performed by Kevin Barbare, Beth Gadow, and Olivia Steele. On Halloween night, a couple's weekend getaway becomes a chilling tradition of terror. An invitation to a mysterious karaoke event in the northern woods leads Mike and Rebecca into an unforgettable, horrifying spectacle. Now, without further ado, I present to you Halloween Karaoke Night Spectacular.
With the twist of a key, Mike and Rebecca gladly spilled into their weekend getaway cabin from the chill of the near November air outside. Rebecca entered first, flaring out her empty arms and closing her eyes, deeply filling both nostrils before slowly exhaling.
Yes. It smells like an old book, but in a good way, Mike. Mike?
Mike's own nose and bushy mustache were pressed firmly against Rebecca's weighty luggage trunk as he struggled to carry it through the doorway. All he could smell were faux leather and a lingering hint of Chanel Happy perfume that was tucked into the trunk somewhere, along with an entirely way too large amount of clothes for merely a weekend trip. He carefully set his armload onto a green area rug before letting out a big sigh and scanning the place. Well, happy Hallow-versary to us, he said softly, with a smile that turned his mustache up into what looked like hairy wings. Their getaway home for the weekend was a lovely A-frame cabin deep in the northern woods. It fit the atmosphere of such a region, befitted with pine walls and floors and a staircase with cedar railing and spokes. It boasted a huge stone fireplace with a caribou trophy hanging above. Small orange and white pumpkins laid by the hearth. Nearby sat a green love seat and a rocking chair that faced a 55-inch flat-screen television. Mike could see a small but fully functional kitchen and fridge. Next to the kitchen was a short hallway that most likely led to the master bedroom. The cozy golden light from lamps of cedar and leather washed over the entirety of the place, except for the upstairs loft, which remained unlit.
Yes. Happy Hallow-versary, my dear.
Rebecca came over to Mike and gave him a slow, careful kiss before pulling away and quickly itching her upper lip.
Ugh, you need to skin that thing.
"Oh, come on, baby," Mike said, turning and leaning into a mirror nearby, its frame wooden and adorned with artful carvings of baby black bears, all smiling. "I look just like Burt Reynolds and Sam Elliott had a baby." He didn't at all. Rebecca rolled her eyes and reached down for her trunk.
You know this thing has wheels, right?
She turned it on its side and pressed on the top, which automatically popped out a handle that also released two big wheels on the bottom. Mike turned to her with a look of shock and playful disgust. "You gotta be kidding me." She gave him a sneaky, closed-lipped smile. He couldn't even be mad at her. That rich, dark hair and those flourishing green eyes could be his entire downfall, and he would be more than appreciative of it. Those eyes locked into Mike's plain brown eyes a short moment longer.
Well, I'm going to go unpack and take a shower. Feel free to join, if you'd like.
She continued a scheming, smoldering look as she walked down the hall, wheeling the trunk behind her. Another golden glow burst on as she entered the bedroom. Mike hadn't taken his eyes off her. Then he snapped back and remembered his tasks at hand. "Okay, honey, just gonna go get my stuff in and set the keyboard up in the loft. I'll do a short clip and post it, then I'll be done with that." Rebecca's head poked back out into the hallway from the bedroom.
You brought the keyboard?
One of her perfectly thick eyebrows raised up. "Yeah, duh." Mike smoothed his hands on his jeans and adjusted his button-down flannel.
You're going to work on our anniversary trip?
"Not really, babe. Just give me 15 minutes and I'll be completely done and all yours."
Fine.
She half sarcastically, half sincerely groaned at him before disappearing into the bedroom, out of sight, but still within earshot. "Honey, last week's video paid for this entire trip," he proudly reminded her.
All right.
She retorted with a slightly raised voice from within the bedroom.
Just don't read me any of those weird, thirsty comments you'll definitely be getting, okay?
Mike gladly played piano since he was a little boy and had become quite good. When he was laid off from his desk job some years back, he took to the internet and to social media with videos of him playing the keyboard under the moniker Piano Hands. His mysterious, faceless online persona, along with sensual low lighting and subtle yet strong index and pinky rings, garnered a lot of female attention to his page. In fact, he had become a niche celebrity, each of his weekly videos gathering millions of views and earning Mike a full-time living. It was easy and enjoyable for him and Rebecca both, given the anonymous nature of Piano Hands. Often speculated in comments what Piano Hands' real identity was. No one would ever guess it was one Mike Gladley. "Oh, honey, they just like my playing. You know you're my one flesh," Mike hollered back to Rebecca and waited.
One flesh.
Rebecca finally answered semi-sweetly. Ever since their marriage, this had been their phrase of affection. It fit the couple, who shared a lifelong affinity for horror movies and both leapt at the idea of getting married on Halloween. "Okay, honey, I'll be done in no time."
Sounds good. I'm gonna pop a gummy.
No, please wait till I'm done. I want one too."
We'll see. Depends on how long you take.
"Okay, I get the message. Be there in a flash." With that, Mike ran back outside to the car and unloaded his keyboard case, wheeling it inside and slowly lugging it backwards up the wooden stairs. After reaching the top, he sat the heavy case down, let out a hushed phew, and checked out the loft after clicking on a tabletop lamp. It had the same pine floors as the rest of the place, and 2 twin beds were placed at each of the far corners, covered in red and green stitched quilts. A large window between the beds, naked of curtains or blinds, showed a profoundly dark world outside into the northern woods. "Perfect," Mike said, hiking up his mustache into a satisfied grin again. He got to work unpacking his keyboard and stand and setting everything up for a short performance. He got out a boom stand with an attached clip that would hold his cell phone for filming. He had it to where he would be facing the big window and pulled the table with the lamp on it over in front of him so the lighting would be good. He even kept 3 small black candles in his pack that he lit for his videos. The ambiance mattered just as much as his actual piano performance did, he learned over time. The comments would mostly be either about how great the vibes were or how sexy his hands were. "They're kidding, right?" Mike had at first asked Rebecca when he began seeing comments about his hands.
Oh no, not at all. Women love good hands. And you got 'em, babe.
She had reluctantly yet sweetly informed him, so he leaned into being Piano Hands and played into the positive engagement. He wore rings, a turquoise bejeweled silver one for his right index finger, a plain black one for his right pinky, and of course, a solid gold wedding band on his ring finger. He always made sure to roll his sleeves up as well, angling the camera to perfectly include all 88 of the black and white keys, his hands, and his forearms into frame. So, after mindlessly executing his filming prep, he was just about ready to press record. Tonight, he would be performing Saint Scene's Dance Macabre to mesh with the ominous, spooky Halloween holiday. He sat at his bench, took a deep breath, and reached up to press his phone's big red on-screen button. His eyes wandered out through the window, and then he was taken aback slightly. He could see lights out there. He took his hand back away from his phone and slowly stood up, inching his way over. He placed his palms on the cold, moist glass and stuck his eyes and mustache close so he could peer out. He could see the tree line where the tall, dark evergreens stood. Halfway up the height of them, several trunks deep, showed what appeared to be a treehouse, 2 windows, and an open doorway lit bright and orange against the otherwise impossibly dark Halloween night. Mike twisted his face in confusion. He stared on, feeling his breath start to quicken. He thought he saw shadows within the windows of the small house. He couldn't quite make out what the shapes could be, though. He just looked on, trying his best not to blink, almost falling into a trance. The orange glow from the treehouse was stark, yet warm, comforting even. Mike was quickly yanked out of his investigative stupor when 5 full-fisted knocks rattled the pine door downstairs and reverberated up to the loft. He pulled himself away from the window and walked over to the railing, looking down toward the cabin entrance. Several large shadows darkened the windows to the front porch, which was pale lit by a streetlight at the end of the drive. "What the?" Mike whispered to himself. He backed up, keeping his eyes downward. He reached his right hand back the entire way until he felt his keyboard. Then he turned around and quickly grabbed his phone off of the boom stand. His gaze once again fell out of the loft window, where all was now dark. No sign of the treehouse. No sign of any specks of light, much less that strange, intoxicating orange glow. Mike gathered himself with a deep breath. Out of instinct to remain anonymous of his internet fame, he slid off Piano Hand's signature rings and placed them on the black and white keys. He turned again and slowly walked over to the cedar staircase that descended from the loft to the living room. He creaked down the first step. 5 more knocks banged against the front door, this time heavier. Okay. Mike put his left hand on the rail and hurried down the stairs, crossing the living room in a flash. Through the windows, he saw the shadowed figures on the porch. He shot his attention back toward the bedroom, listening for Rebecca. He heard the telltale sound of running water. She was in the shower. He sighed and approached the cabin's entrance. He gently cracked open the front door, cold air spilling in from the northern world outside. Can I help you?" Mike raised his voice slightly, trying to mask his nervousness. He couldn't see much through the slit he had opened by design. He didn't want to have to face these strangers alone if he didn't have to. "Trick or treat!" He heard high-pitched children's voices sweetly ring out to him. He was as instantly warmed over with relief. He had almost forgotten that this was Halloween. "Oh, yep, just a second, kiddos." Mike felt a smile sweep over his mustached face as he half-danced across the living room and over to the kitchen. The Gladleys had, of course, packed a huge bag of mixed chocolate candies for their Halloversary trip, and Mike didn't mind at all relinquishing a few pieces. He tore open and reached into a big plastic bag and pulled out a few Reese's white chocolate pumpkins, a couple of Twixes, and an Almond Joy. There's always someone in the group that loves those for some reason. Both fists full, he marched back over to the front door and used his left foot to pull it open all the way. He clicked on the yellow porch light. Standing in the doorway, he took in the brisk night air and got a good look at his guests. There were what appeared to be 2 adults and 2 kids standing there on the front porch. They all wore black long-sleeve tops and long pants. They had on masks made to look like various farm animals. The adults with cow and chicken faces, and the kids with pigs. The kids held brown paper bags. Mike stood there with an inquisitive smile, internally amused by their choices of costume. "Here you go, kids." He held out his clenched hands and dropped the candy into the outstretched bags. "Thank you," the kids sang in perfect unison. "Yeah, for sure. Happy Halloween. You all from around here?" One of the adults, wearing a cow mask and the size of a man, cleared his throat. "We're right around the corner through the woods." A low, booming voice vibrated behind the bovine disguise. "Oh, cool. Boy, I wish my wife could see y'all. She's taking a shower right now, but I'll have to tell her y'all stopped by. She would have loved your outfits." Mike was putting on his best, exaggerated nice guy routine. Something about this group pinged his concern, though. People from the northern woods weren't exactly known to be the warmest of folks, but something about this little barnyard party was a little odd. The chicken mask, shaped more like a woman, spoke up.
"Well, actually, we wanted to invite you to our little party we're throwing tonight."
Her voice was more normal than the man's low deadpan. It was almost friendly. She reached into a pocket and pulled out an 8x10 laminated piece of paper. She walked up and put it in Mike's open hand.
"All the information is right there. It happens once a year. The whole neighborhood always turns out. We'll be expecting you."
The 2 little pigs giggled, making their candy bags shake. The chicken lady walked back and got under the arm of the cowman. Mike held his best staged smile. "Oh, wow, that sounds fun. Yes, let me talk to my wife. It's our anniversary tonight, so I'm sure she's got some plans for us, but I'll try and talk her into it."
"We'll see you there,"
the chicken lady said with a low, matter-of-fact alto. A pause grew pregnant between Mike and the farmyard family. After a few seconds, the cowman raised his head and let out a huge, low moo. that produced a small cloud of condensation through his mask into the cold air. The little pigs laughed full-heartedly. Mike matched them with a nervous giggle of his own. He shot his eyes back indoors to see if Rebecca was out of the shower yet. He saw no signs of her. He returned his eyes to the front porch. The animal-faced neighbors were suddenly at the very end of the driveway. They had somehow moved a couple of 100 feet in a matter of 2 seconds. They stood under the light pole, facing Mike. The chicken lady waved slowly. Then they all turned and walked off into the darkness down the gravel road. Mike's eyes shot open wide as his kind facade fell. He backed into the cabin quickly and shut the door. He clicked off the porch light. He walked across the living room and into the kitchen, holding up the laminated piece of paper to his mustache so he could read it clearly. It was matte black with raised light red lettering. You are invited to the 49th Annual Karaoke Night Spectacular. Time, tonight. Location, follow the signs into the woods. I have your song ready. We'll see you there. Mike flipped over the paper, a curious frown forming on his mouth. There was nothing on the back. What kind of invitation was this? No set time, just tonight? No location except in the woods? This had to be a joke. Yeah, that's it. Just a little Halloween fun. A prank. A decent one at that. Mike had been unsettled. He smirked at the thought. He had been had by the neighbors, wanting to get a little spooky jab in on the out-of-towners. Just a prank. Mike sighed and placed the invitation in the wastebasket. He then began to walk his way back toward the loft staircase. He passed the hallway that led to the bedroom. Over the sound of the shower running, he heard Rebecca.
Mike? Mike! You better get in here before the water goes cold,
she bellowed out. Mike paused and glanced up to the loft. His video shoot had been interrupted, and he wanted to go finish that so he wouldn't have to think about it the rest of the weekend. Maybe Rebecca was right, though. Perhaps it was foolish for him to think about work on his anniversary trip. Yeah, she was right. She usually was. Mike let out a small chuckle as he reached down and began unbuttoning his shirt. Coming, babe. So Mike went back to the shower and joined in with his one flesh. Twice, actually. Attaboy, Mike. And soon the two of them were out and dressed and curled up on the green love seat that sat in front of the stone hearth, the impressive caribou trophy, and the flat-screen television. Playing on the television was the DVD of a Vincent Price triple feature. They couldn't trust the spotty Northern Woods Wi-Fi to offer any good streaming service, if such a thing even exists anymore. A well-gummied-up Rebecca laid with her head on Mike's flannel chest, gently stroking his mustache.
Maybe this thing is growing on me after all,
she said endearingly. Well, technically,
it's growing on you,
she finished his nerdy, half-humorous quip. They both let out exaggerated ha's in each other's faces before giving genuine giggles right before a long, soft kiss that is only perfected on wedding anniversaries.
Ha!
Rebecca sighed as she sat up.
Oh, Mama Bear's got the munchies.
Oh, yeah? What you thinking? Mike asked.
No, none for you, Mr. No Gummy.
Rebecca sarcastically pointed a finger in Mike's face with a big smile. She got off the love seat and childishly skipped away toward the kitchen. Mike sat up. Hey, it's just nice having you be so sweet to me, honey. I want to be clear-headed to remember this, it being such a rare event. His eyebrows and mustache turned upward in unison. They met eyes, and he gave her a wink.
Yeah.
She jabbed, sifting through their grocery bags on the kitchen counter. She pulled out the torn-in-two bag of candy.
Did you already open up our candy, you jerk? You big goofy glutton?
She playfully picked at him. Mike stared ahead up to the caribou, and his eyes twitched open a little wider. He had almost forgotten about the neighbors coming by to trick-or-treat earlier. Not having any interest whatsoever in going to the Halloween Karaoke Night Spectacular, he decided to treat Rebecca to a white chocolate lie. He turned to her. Yeah. Oops. Couldn't help myself, honey. My bad, he sheepishly replied.
You bad boy. You're on the naughty list this year for sure.
She gave him sexy green-eyed daggers from the kitchen counter where she dug into the bag and pulled out a Twix. "Wrong holiday, honey." Mike smirked and moved his attention to the television where Vincent Price's face was slowly zooming in to a close-up, clearly worried about something. Rebecca sucked down her Twix about as fast as a human could and took the wrapper over to the wastebasket, placing it inside. Her eyes caught a laminated, lackadaisically thrown away invitation.
What's that?
She asked suspiciously. "What's what?" Mike turned around and nervously inhaled through his nose when he saw Rebecca holding the black and red invitation in her hand.
This?
She gave him a look like a third-grade teacher would when a student says that they forgot their homework. "Oh yeah, the neighbors came by. Trick-or-treaters. A family. I don't know, they invited us to this dumb party they're having or something. I figured it was a no-go for us, so I tossed it." Rebecca took a silent moment to read the invitation, her mouth turned down and her eyes wide with interest.
Karaoke? Babe, we used to love to sing karaoke together. We're going.
"Oh, honey, come on."
No, we are going. What's that old duet we used to kill?
"Babe, these people were weird." Mike stood and went over to the kitchen to join Rebecca, taking her free hand in his. "Like, I don't know, they were kind of creepy. They all had on like farm animal masks and were acting all strange. I don't think this is the party for us." Rebecca playfully pulled her hand out of his and threw up her arms with a smile.
Oh, wow. Heaven forbid a Halloween party is creepy, Mike.
She laughed, set down the invitation on the counter, and took both of Mike's hands. They shared a soft laugh and an understanding smile.
Come on, baby. Where's the macabre, lovin', massacre, mesmerized, mustached man I married in a midnight matrimony?
She improvised slowly with a high, closed-mouth smile, her face pulled close to his. She rubbed his mustache with her nose. They both laughed and pulled away, their faces tickled. "Oh, honey." Mike took her in yet again, lifting up into a goofily evil grin, raising one eyebrow. "That's not fair. You know how much your clunky alliteration turns me on." "Fine. We'll go." Rebecca threw up her arms.
Yay! Crap. We gotta throw some costumes together.
Oh boy, how are we gonna pull that off? Before long, the couple, whom were married on Halloween, were at the front door, ready to scamper off into the cold, dark night toward a mysterious holiday party. Rebecca had done an okay job improvising their costumes. She had paled both of their faces white with makeup, trailing red lipstick down from their mouths to look like blood. With eyeliner, she made dark patches here and there on their otherwise bone-colored foreheads and cheeks. Mike looked into the baby black bear-encrusted mirror from before. What are we even supposed to be? Rebecca joined him in the mirror and raised up her hands to her head, turning her wrists downward and outstretching her fingers. She bared her teeth.
Zombies. Or maybe vampires. Or ghouls of some sort. I'm not totally sure. But whatever we are, we're dead.
She said with her best Vincent Price accent. They both laughed. I dig it. Well, you ready? They were off and out the door, into the chilly, comforting blanket of Halloween night. She kept her arm tucked into his as they shivered and made their way across the driveway.
Should we not drive?
She asked. Middle of the woods, babe. Doesn't really sound like a good parking situation.
True. Okay. Hey, that fits the vibe even better. A nice, spooky little hike.
Mike kissed her, then breathed out a visible sigh in the brisk air. Happy Halloversary, dear.
Happy Halloversary, my one flesh.
Mwahahaha. Mike laughed ghoulishly. They took off down the gravel road into the night. The northern woods quickly swallowed them up into darkness as they crunched their way down the road. Luckily for them, it was almost a full moon, which scattered porcelain veils down at them through the evergreen limbs. In the distance, an owl hooted. They could hear the intermittent scampering of small rodents here and there.
Oh, wow, Mike. This really feels like a Halloween night, doesn't it?
Sure does, baby. The moon, the scary trees. Did you hear that owl? It's perfect.
Wait. What's our karaoke song gonna be?
Rebecca asked. I thought you had that idea.
Oh, yeah, I do. Whoops. Time of my life, right? Like we used to do?
Sure. You got those high notes in you? You're a good singer, but no offense, you're not exactly at your best when you're this gummified. Mike squeezed her arm in jest.
Oh, come on, babe. It's karaoke. It's not supposed to be good.
I hope not. They chuckled. They continued down the dark North Country lane. As they walked, the canopy of the evergreens began to thicken, slowly choking out even the moonlight. Ahead of them on the right, though, they saw a sign of some sort, holding 3 short candles on top. They approached it. "This way," it read, with a red arrow pointing off the road and onto a trail that led into the trees. "Well, must be our sign," Mike said as they turned off and threw themselves into the forest. They followed the dark trail for a couple of minutes until they reached some new lights, kerosene lanterns that were hung from trees on both sides of the path.
Ooh, that's nice. Maybe we are going the right way.
A slightly concerned Rebecca sighed. "You know," Mike began, "the northern woods are full of urban legends and folk tales."
Yeah?
"Oh yes, babe. All sorts of stories, like the werewolf of Dark County, or the Yeti, or the demon hog, or even the hollow monster," Mike whispered, starting to match Rebecca's slight concern.
No, babe. The hollow monster is in the Appalachians, and the demon hog I'm pretty sure is from the south as well.
Okay, even so, these woods are full of strange, strange stuff. But hey, what better way to spend a night like this? With you.
Aw, Mike.
Wait, babe, do you hear that? They walked through the lamp-lit trail until suddenly they approached a huge wooden gate. It was blazing bright with torches on each side. In big wooden lettering, the gate read, "Halloween Karaoke Night Spectacular" in red paint. On tables to the left and right were huge pumpkins carved into beaming, devilish jack-o'-lanterns. Through the gate, they could hear what sounded like hundreds of people enjoying a party atmosphere. Loud music was playing.
This must be the place.
A relieved Rebecca said, arms still folded into Mike's. "Here we go," Mike replied. Together they marched through the big wooden entrance and into the deep woods party. There were seemingly hundreds of people here, all lit up with various torches and Halloween decoration lights of orange, purple, and green. Dozens of booths were set up in a large perimeter that was cleared of trees, leaving plenty of room for all sorts of festivities. Mike and Rebecca walked in fully unbeknownst, given the size of the crowds. They were able to take in the atmosphere completely under the radar. Mike looked over and saw a booth serving hard apple cider, as specified by a white and dark green sign above. A woman, dressed up as a witch, was in the booth, stirring up a giant cauldron of steaming, dark liquid. She dipped out a cup and handed it to a man in a mummy costume. Rebecca looked and saw a group of people dressed up as ghosts, throwing darts at a skeleton decoration that had been chained into a cobwebbed covered wall. One of the ghosts hit the skeleton in its right eye socket. A bell rang, and all the ghosts cheered.
This place is sick,
Rebecca excitedly remarked. "No kidding, babe. I think we hit the jackpot." They continued on through the party, passing numerous other booths. They crossed in front of a large bar area done up into a cemetery, with a hazy fog surrounding the tables, concrete-colored styrofoam headstones littering the ground all over. A sign above the bar read, L.O. Kingfisher's Graveyard Bar and Grill. A large, tall man in a beige seersucker suit and wide-brimmed hat was there, serving drinks to costumed customers, his eyes glowing red behind dark, round-framed glasses. He noticed Mike and Rebecca and gave them a big, evil smirk that was adorned with a red-lit cigarette.
Is that the stage?
Rebecca turned ahead and pointed. They both stopped. In front of them was a seating area with hundreds of chairs facing a tall, wide trailer stage. Several old leather chairs lined the back of the stage. 6 microphones on stands were placed at the front. It had no covering, simply opening up to the dark, crowded forest behind it. A small group of partygoers gathered at the stage, speaking to a man that was up there, crouched down, interacting with them. Mike and Rebecca walked up to the last row of audience seats to get a better look.
Whew. Do we have to do this?
Rebecca nervously tugged at Mike's arm. "Oh, come on, babe. Don't be scared. We can do this."
Okay, fine. Just kind of paranoid, I guess.
She giggled. "This'll be fun. We'll sing our duet. We'll make new friends. We'll get some of that hard cider for sure. And then we can go home. Sound good? Mike encouraged.
Sounds great.
Suddenly, a big spotlight exploded onto Mike and Rebecca. Mike gasped. Rebecca let out a short scream. They raised their forearms to their eyes, squinting up through the blinding beam to see where it was coming from. It seemed to be coming from the top of a tree out of sight to the right of the stage. Then, a big, booming, creepy voice erupted throughout the entire party.
Ladies and gentlemen, our very last karaoke participants have finally arrived.
Mike and Rebecca remained brightened by the spotlight, hands still in front of their faces. The entirety of the crowd blasted into furious applause from all over the party. They whooped and cheered and laughed and clapped like it was the Super Bowl.
You may all now take your seats by the stage. We will begin momentarily.
The voice blared out again, with all the pained rising and falling inflection of a wrestling announcer who had smoked for 50 years. At that, the spotlight turned off, and Mike and Rebecca were once again darkened. They looked at each other in explicit confusion.
What kind of party is this?
She blurted at him with a nervous smile. Boy, I don't know. That was quite the welcome wagon. Mike looked sheepish. I guess we should go to the stage?
I guess.
Rebecca weakly replied. They worked their way through the rows of chairs and up to the large, uncovered trailer stage. A group of 4 were at ground level to greet them. A young woman, costumed with long, witchy flows of white hair, a big fake hooked nose, and stilts, all covered in a flowing dress, approached them.
You two must be the last participants,
she said with a friendly voice.
Yeah, I think so.
Rebecca replied, eyes still showing surprise at such a production. Some party, huh? Mike remarked with a curious little laugh.
Oh, this is more than a party. This is a sacred tradition.
The young woman held out her hands and turned her fake nose up at the sky briefly.
It is truly an honor to get to participate in such a holy night.
The other participants noticed Mike and Rebecca and also gathered near them. 2 of them seemed like a couple, dressed as Fred and Wilma Flintstone. A young man in a banana suit gave them an anxious smile, his face sweating. The man dressed as Fred Flintstone shook each of their hands with a closed-lipped smile and nod.
Pleased to know you. What an honor to join you here tonight.
Thanks, man. I mean, we've sang a little karaoke back in the day, but never anything this crazy, Mike answered, hinging his mustache up into an unsure half-smile.
Yeah, we probably should have rehearsed,
Rebecca said shyly. The other participants widened their eyes in shock.
You haven't even rehearsed?
Wilma Flintstone asked, with sharp surprise. Well, nah, we just got invited like an hour ago from our neighbors. Just thought we'd wing it. More fun that way, isn't it? Mike answered confidently. The other participants held their wide-eyed looks.
Well, you better go talk to Weirdo so you can get your names and song down then,
Fred said lowly. Who's... Mike was interrupted by strong hands coming down on his and Rebecca's shoulders from behind.
Well, well, well. You 2 must be the last participants in tonight's show.
They turned around to see a tall man about 6'2". He wore an all-black suit down to his shirt and tie, with incredible makeup. He appeared to have 3 eyes, 2 sharp noses, and 2 mouths all lined with pointed teeth. His eyes were all dark blue, rimmed with bloodshot veins. He was completely bald, wrinkles sprawling across his scalp. His earlobes hung low from age. Rebecca yelped. Yes, sir, that's us. Great costume, man, Mike remarked.
Come along, you 2. Time is short. Let's get you all checked in.
The strange tall man sounded like he was choking on gravel and perfectly matched the announcer on the loudspeaker from moments before. He grabbed a clipboard from the edge of the stage and pulled a pen out of his coat pocket.
Since you showed up last, you will be our closer tonight. Just right here. Sign your name and your song title and I will take care of the rest. Will your song be in the original key of the recording?
He growled at them. Sure, that's fine, thanks. Mike nudged Rebecca, who was definitely coming across as someone paranoid off a gummy.
Yeah, that's cool.
Rebecca weakly added,
All right, then. Can all participants hear me?
The tall man hollered over where the others could hear as well. They walked a bit closer and all nodded.
Great. Take your seats on the stage in the order of appearance, please. We are all set to begin.
Mike, Rebecca, and the others all walked their way to the side stage and up the stairs onto the tall platform. Mike and Rebecca walked to the very end of the row of leather chairs, knowing they were to be the closers. As they walked, that strange, toiling voice once again boomed over the speakers.
Ladies and gentlemen, you may now take your seats as our Halloween Karaoke Night Spectacular is set to begin.
Mike and Rebecca found their two last seats and planted down, facing the audience. To their shock, the hundreds and hundreds of partygoers had instantly filled their chairs and sat quietly. Not a word murmured from their entirety. They sat as solemn as a church. Wolf masks, Frankenstein faces, witch hats, clowns, zombies, and beasts of all sorts all watched the stage in silence. Even the ambient music from the booths and bars behind had gone quiet. Then, that same great spotlight from high above the trees to the right of the trailer stage exploded again into a blinding circle. A brilliant column descending to center stage, where the strange man with 2 or 3 of every facial feature stood with a microphone.
We are proudly gathered here on this night of nights to celebrate our grand tradition.
The crowd began an uproar of applause, but to Mike and Rebecca's bone-deep astonishment, they all remained perfectly still in their seats. Not a finger moved. And yet, the sound of raucous cheering soared up to the participants on stage, loud whooping and yelling as well, without a single mouth appearing to open. Mike and Rebecca shared a look.
Must be over the loudspeakers,
Mike mouthed to where she could read his mustached lips. She just responded with wide eyes and a tightened frown. The tall man on the microphone held up his arm to the cheers and then dropped it swiftly, extinguishing all noise in an instant.
Now, we have a long night ahead. We had better get started.
He cleared his damaged throat, which sounded just as gross as you would imagine.
My name is Weirdo Waggoner, and I will be your master of ceremonies this evening. Yes, it is our beloved Halloween Karaoke Night Spectacular. All participants have entered the contest out of their own free will. As we all know, they will be asked to approach their microphone, state their name, their costume, and the title of their song, either as a solo or duet performance. Afterward, the judge will deem their performance as either acceptable or unacceptable.
The strange man, apparently named Weirdo Waggoner, used a little more poison in his words with those last remarks. The young man in the banana suit was in the leather chair next to Rebecca. She leaned into him.
We're being judged? Why? It's just karaoke. I didn't know.
The banana man silenced her. He was sweating even more now. Rebecca looked down the row of participants. The other 3 of them were smiling at the audience with great pride. The girl in the witchy flowing white hair beamed. Fred Flintstone gave a fleshy-handed thumbs up, and Wilma Flintstone also looked on happily.
I'm not supposed to be here,
Banana Man whispered.
I'm not supposed to be here.
What? Why?
Rebecca whispered back sharply. He shushed her again. Rebecca turned over and nudged Mike, whose painted-on ghoulish face looked on idiotically. He leaned into Rebecca with a soft whisper of his own.
This is so wild.
This is so weird. What is going on?
Guess we'll find out. You ready to sing, babe?
No, something is really wrong about...
Silence, please, dear participants.
Weirdo turned to face the leather chairs on stage before returning his 3-eyed gaze to the audience.
Who's ready for karaoke?
The crowd once again gave a deathly still ovation before Weirdo raised and dropped his arm again, causing all quiet. May our first participant please approach your microphone, state your name and costume, and song title, please. The young woman in the witchy outfit arose out of her leather chair, gave a stilted curtsy, and walked up to the microphone stand. With that, Weirdo Wagoner put his own microphone up, walked over to an old karaoke machine located on the very side of the stage, and inserted a cassette tape before pressing play. The melancholic piano intro of Someone Like You began to play over the speakers, and Flora Shields began singing. Her voice floated in the air like silk confetti. She hit every note, and not only that, she felt every note. She sang the ballad with such understanding that even Adele herself couldn't top it. It was magnificent. Mike and Rebecca shared quick glances of pure awe. The song ended, and Flora took a bow before a hushed audience. Well, 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 a rousing rendition, young Flora, Weirdo spoke out, having taken back his microphone. Let's get a word from the judge. At this, Weirdo turned all the way around and faced out behind the stage into the darkness of the northern woods. His 3 eyes were held wide in anticipation. His 2 sharp noses twitched and his mouths trembled. Mike and Rebecca turned and glanced out into the darkness before shooting raised eyebrows at each other. Mike bounced his shoulders and Rebecca followed suit, not knowing what they were supposed to be waiting for. Everyone in the audience held their breath. A few more seconds of silence passed before Weirdo raised his hands in acknowledgement. Ah, yes, you, Flora, are deemed acceptable. The crowd roared in their still seats yet again, the sound rowdier than ever. Very good, young Flora. Okay, next up. Fred and Wilma Flintstone stood and approached 2 microphone stands. Good evening. My name is Jerry Topper, and this is my wife, Sonia. We're dressed up as Fred and Wilma Flintstone, and we're going to be singing Islands in the Stream by Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton. Weirdo once again walked over to the karaoke machine, took out the old cassette, placed a new one inside, and hit play. Jerry and Sonia Topper started in on a fun-loving, joyous performance of Islands in the Stream. Although drowning with confusion, Mike and Rebecca eased up on their fears enough to find themselves tapping their toes and nodding their heads. Jerry and Sonia hammed it up perfectly. Jerry dropped to his knees at one point, and the audience busted out into completely frozen laughter. Once the song was done, Jerry and Sonia took a bow and returned to their seats with big, toothy smiles. Yes, yes, you two, Weirdo chimed in his horrid, stony tone. It seemed like his voice was getting worse the more he used it. And now, the call from the judge. He once again turned back into the ever-growing darkness of the trees behind stage. Rebecca turned and saw the Banana Man visibly shaking in his seat. He was dripping sweat now. Rebecca nudged Mike again to get a look at the kid. Just nervous. So am I, Mike mimed.
Something is wrong,
she mouthed back. Don't worry, babe. We'll do fine, he whispered. A couple seconds passed, and then Weirdo addressed the room again. Acceptable. Well done, dear participants. Cheers yet again. Okay, next up, please. Rebecca shot a look that followed the Banana Man up to his mic. His hand shook the entire walk up. Hi, my name is Zach Easton. I'm a banana, and my song tonight is going to be My Way by Frank Sinatra. He struggled to speak into the microphone. He was full body trembling at this point. Okay, Weirdo snarked before going over and fixing the cassette and pressing play. The orchestral strumming of My Way began. Zach held a shaking microphone in his right hand. He started in with the vocal. He barely choked out the first words, completely off key and fraught with nerves. It didn't improve much throughout the performance. His knees vibrated as his anxiety swelled into a crescendo at the end of the song. Zach was practically crying out the final vocals. Mercifully, the song ended. Zach dropped the mic with a loud feedback boom. He buried his face in his hands and dropped to his knees. Now, Zach Easton. Weirdo walked over and knelt down to the boy, putting a hand on his banana peel back. Then, Weirdo stood up sharply, pointing a crooked finger out behind the stage yet again. What is your judgment for that diabolically poor performance? Immediately, an explosive roar thundered out from the northern woods behind the participants. It sounded like 2 freight trains blaring their horns and crashing into each other. Then, chilling silence. Mike and Rebecca locked frightened eyes. Their chests began to rise and fall quickly. Unacceptable! You are unacceptable in the eyes of our false god, you wicked servant! Weirdo screamed at Zach, who was a bent-over banana crumpling on stage. No, I shouldn't be here! I shouldn't even be here! He pleaded, crawling over to Weirdo's long legs. Weirdo kicked him off. Stand and face your judgment, boy.
What happens if you're unacceptable?
Rebecca finally screamed out loud enough for the entire stage and audience to hear. Everyone went dead quiet. Weirdo turned and faced her. His 3 eyes tightened into mean slits. His mouth turned up into a doubly devilish sneer. You should know you're sitting on last year's unacceptable participants. The audience raged with laughter, remaining still. Flora Shields, dressed as the witch Tall Betsy, chortled heartily on stage. The toppers, as Fred and Wilma Flintstone, pointed and laughed as well. Mike and Rebecca met each other's faces before turning them down to their seats. Mike lifted his arm and got a closer look at the leather. It had human hair. The arm of the chair had the inch-long dark hair of a human man. Rebecca sat up. She screamed instantly, as piercing and brutal as she could master. The seat of her chair had a faded butterfly tattoo with fine, short blonde hair covering its entirety. The back of the chair had the almost unrecognizable shape of a face stitched into the center, with crude, stretched holes where the eyes and nostrils and mouth would have been. Mike stood up as well, but was distracted by a monstrous thump that came from the dark woods and shook the entire stage. Then, another thump. Footsteps. Gigantic footsteps. Bow down, everyone. Do not look upon him. Bow. Weirdo exclaimed before falling prostrate in the direction of the mountainous footfalls. Mike turned out to the crowd. They had all instantly fallen forward, stretched unnaturally with their heads all bowed and their arms all the way forward. He turned to the other participants, who all had also fallen in worship. Mike quickly pulled down Rebecca, and they both laid on their stomachs and did the same. Rebecca turned tear-filled eyes over to Mike.
What is going on?
She weakly whispered through sobs and spit. Mike quickly shook his head. We're getting out of this, babe, he whispered. Eyes to the stage floor, they listened on as several more earth-shaking booms echoed into the Halloween night. Then, more silence. Rebecca's tears made a small puddle that Mike noticed. He tried to get an indirect look at what was approaching through the small aquatic mirror. What he saw rattled him to his soul. Quickly glowing into view was what appeared to be 3 orange lights, square and spaced out like the windows and doorway of a treehouse. Another roar. Out of fear, Mike looked away, pushing his mustache against the stage and pinching his eyes shut. Zach Easton, the banana man, let out a loud shriek before the sound of a large swipe sliced over the stage, lifting his screams higher and higher up into the air to the treetops. The screams grew fainter and more distant as the booming footfalls also began to wane off back into the forest. Weirdo's graveled voice echoed over the loudspeaker. and Mike and Rebecca sat up, looking around the stage. The other participants sat in their chairs, smiling like nothing had happened. Weirdo looked over at Mike and Rebecca with a "get up." His 3 eyes were wide and friendly, and he offered 2 wholesome smiles under his noses. Rebecca looked to the front of the stage where Zach was. He was gone, and all that remained was a small glob of shiny, wet red. She gasped. Mike looked to the crowd and saw they were also back in their seats as if nothing had happened. He spotted a group on the front row he hadn't noticed before. A family of 4. The dad in a cow mask, the mother in a chicken mask, and the kids in pig masks. They all gently waved. Mike snarled at them. "You!" he pointed at the family. Now, come. It is time for our last participants," Weirdo announced. Mike pulled Rebecca up, her pale white ghoul zombie vampire makeup now smudged with crying. Her green eyes were as striking as ever. He pulled her close. "I'm gonna get us out of this, babe.
How?
Trust me." Together, they staggered over to the 2 microphones. Weirdo smiled at them in anticipation. "Hello, my name is Mike Gladley, and this is my wife, Rebecca. We're dressed as, well, I guess, zombies." Mike gave her arm a squeeze. He paused, looking out into the costumed crowd. "We don't live in this area. We were invited by strangers and have no idea what the hell is going on, and we hereby ask to be withdrawn from the karaoke contest." Mike held on to Rebecca, who struggled to breathe through her sorrows. "Absolutely not. You admitted yourself into this event, and you are to carry out your duties." Weirdo snapped at them, his troubled voice growing more hoarse by the minute. "You must give an acceptable performance to the false god, or you will perish," he croaked. Mike quickly thought to himself, the spotlight boiling down on him. He felt every eye in the room drilling into his head. An acceptable performance? "Does it have to be karaoke?" Mike asked into the microphone. At this, Rebecca perked up, realizing where Mike was going. "Well, I suppose not," Weirdo replied with an elbow raised. "Usually we only do karaoke, but in years past, exceptional performances of other kinds have been deemed acceptable." "Well," Mike continued, slowly feeling relief spread over his body, "it just so happens I am a world-renowned pianist." The crowd gasped, this time actually unlocked from their statuesque positions, heads leaned back in amusement. Rebecca smiled at Mike. "That's right. I would like to perform a song on my keyboard in lieu of our karaoke performance. I can get my keyboard from our cabin if you'll give me the time." "A world-renowned pianist, he says." Weirdo Wagoner gestured at Mike, all 3 eyes to the audience. "Yes, sir." Weirdo began laughing, almost a horrible choking. He doubled over. "What's so funny, Weirdo?" Mike asked sternly. This guy thinks he is piano hands or something," Weirdo shouted, before himself and the entirety of the crowd and the others on stage all fell out with the loudest laughter that Mike and Rebecca had ever heard. They shot wide-eyed daggers at each other.
He is piano hands, I promise.
Rebecca screamed into her microphone. I really am, Mike added confidently. You, my friend, are definitely not piano hands. Here we all love piano hands. We play his music all the time. The false god knows and loves his music. There is no way that you are anything close to what he is. You don't look anything like him, Weirdo remarked proudly. I never show my face in the videos. Of course you don't think I look like him.
Check his hands!
A female voice shouted from the audience. Rebecca smirked. Fair enough. Weirdo walked over to Mike and snatched his right hand, holding it up to the spotlight. Do these look like piano hands' hands? He doesn't even have the signature rings. The crowd, animated now, began to boo at Mike and Rebecca. "Well, I didn't wear them tonight," Mike said, deflated. More boos. Yeah, sure." Weirdo dropped Mike's hand. "Enough wasting our time. State your song and give us the performance of your lives." Jeez. Man. Fine. We're doing I Had the Time of My Life by, who's it by, honey? Mike looked at Rebecca, his face quickly turning gray under that white makeup.
I don't even know. What does it matter?
Rebecca sounded utterly defeated.
Okay, cool. Away we go.
Weirdo danced over to the karaoke machine and popped in the new cassette. "Babe, no matter what, I'm so happy to be with you," Mike whispered and gave Rebecca a kiss on the cheek. The spotlight swallowed them whole and the crowd felt like 10,000. Their hearts pounded harder and harder.
You too, honey.
She gave him a tearful smile. The music started. As soon as Mike heard the first chord, he started right in with his vocal. He somehow nailed the first line. With the power of the song, his muscle memory kicked in. He had sang this dozens of times with Rebecca, in bars across the country, in front of their families and friends. All of those warm memories fled back in, and suddenly he was only singing for his beloved wife on their wedding anniversary. His one flesh. Rebecca saw his energy and was able to match it. What did anything else matter? She was with her wonderful, goofy husband, singing their favorite duet. Who cares what would happen after? In this moment, they had each other. She sold the feeling of her lines and sang sweetly. She was the singer out of the two of them. He could carry a tune, but she was much more talented. A few excited whoops leapt out from the crowd. Weirdo Wagoner raised 3 eyebrows and started nodding his head to the beat. Mike and Rebecca began their harmonized verse together. They were crushing it. The crowd was starting to feel it too. What started as a few claps in time soon turned into the entire crowd clapping along. Finally, when the first chorus came, Mike and Rebecca were fully in the zone. They held the microphones up to their mouths, but pointed out to the crowd with their other hands, inviting them to join in. I had the time of my life. Mike, Rebecca, and hundreds of other Halloween partygoers all erupted in song together. The crowd all had their hands raised as they all clapped along. By the second verse, the entire audience was on their feet. Mike and Rebecca played to each other like seasoned Vegas professionals. They meant every lyric. The emotion in it was bursting from their hearts. They worked the stage, stepping out to each side of the room, making every member of the crowd feel seen and involved. Mike pointed at a couple of ladies in the audience who were dressed up as black cats. They both smiled and acted like they were fainting. Mike gave them a wink that curled up one side of his mustache. Rebecca made green eyes at a group of men dressed as pirates, blowing them a kiss. They let out enthusiastic "R's" and laughed deeply. Then, Mike and Rebecca faced each other again, walking toward center stage for the final chorus. They looked into each other's eyes and let everything else melt away. They ended the song, fully embraced in a tight, warm hug, breathing deeply, satisfied. The audience sprang to their feet in pure mania. They screamed and cheered and stomped their feet as Mike and Rebecca turned to face them. They held hands and gave a big, deep bow. Mike turned and saw the other participants on stage standing and cheering. Rebecca looked, and even Weirdo Wagoner was clapping and wore 2 big smiles. He grabbed his mic.
Wow! Extraordinary performance! What a shocker! Keep it going for Mike and Rebecca gladly, ladies and gentlemen.
The crowd kept on for 3 solid minutes, whistling and shouting for joy. Mike held Rebecca. What was once tears of doom were now for joy. Their made-up faces were smearing badly from sweat. Finally, the room calmed under Weirdo's suggestion.
Now, it doesn't really seem necessary.
but let's hear what the judge thinks of that Halloween Karaoke Night spectacular performance.
Weirdo turned once again back behind the stage and into the dark. Mike and Rebecca did as well, still smiling and holding each other. They met eyes with the other participants. Fred and Wilma smiled and nodded. Tall Betsy gave a quick thumbs up. Banana Boy's chair remained empty. Mike looked off into the night. Nothing moved back there in the Everdark. Another stifling moment passed.
Well, well. Looks like it was what we expected. You are
Weirdo Wagoner was cut off by an angry, foreboding roar born deep within the bowels of the northern woods. Guttural and grinding, it poured into everybody's ears like molten coal. A few screams escaped from the audience. The participants, still facing Mike and Rebecca, shot their eyes wide open and sprang their hands to their faces at the sound. Then, the telltale booms from the heavy, heavy footfalls began to sound again, getting closer by the thump.
What?
Weirdo said flatly.
Oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no.
Rebecca began whimpering and buried her head in Mike's chest.
Everybody, bow! Now!
Weirdo yelled into the mic before diving down on the stage and sprawling out toward the terrible sound. Mike and Rebecca remained facing behind the stage into the dark woods, awaiting their judgment. Behind them, the stunned audience fell to their faces in heinous worship. Rebecca's sobs soaked Mike's flannel shirt. He locked his gaze on the forest where deep booms continued to track towards the stage. The spotlight remained on them, as blazing as ever. Mike then saw those 3 orange lights slowly approaching from deep within the wood. They came from the treetops, as high as he could see. They got bigger and brighter as they got closer with each heavy step. Soon, when they were close enough, Mike finally saw the truth. The lights weren't from a treehouse at all. Craning his head up, he could see a great wooden head staring down at him from up above the trees. 2 giant eye holes and an agape mouth opened down at him. The light from orange fire raged behind the orifices. The rest of the great wooden being was mostly shadowed, but Mike could tell it had a large body and arms. The false god stomped 2 times closer, revealing impossibly thick tree trunk legs. Mike was glad that Rebecca had surrendered her face to his chest. He didn't want her to see this. The great wooden being slowly raised an arm that was equally as thick and terrible as its legs. As it began a slow, burdened swipe down at them, Mike could see a twisted, branched fist that gnarled open as it plummeted straight for them. Mike took Rebecca under both of his arms, enveloping her as wholly as he could with his body. He slammed his eyes closed. When the hand of the false god hit them, Mike died instantly, his head taking the full force of the blow. He didn't even hear it happen. Rebecca wasn't so lucky, though. The air was knocked out of her lungs as she took the shockwave through Mike's body. She felt herself rising quickly through the air, her mouth wide open in a silent, choked scream. The damp, wooden fingers squeezed their bodies so tight that Rebecca thought she would burst, but they eased up at the last second as the hand brought them up to the treetops. Rebecca looked out into the cold night. The moon was almost full and was as big and bright as that spotlight had been on stage. Finally, her seized lungs functioned again as the fist turned her and Mike's lifeless, gooey body down toward the flaming maw. Rebecca used her last fully functional breath to scream with all her heart as the false god dropped her and Mike into its fiery mouth. The fall felt like a roller coaster dropping. Sadly, Rebecca remained conscious enough to realize what was happening to her as she shrieked into the flames. Mike followed suit, but silently and peacefully. It took several minutes for Rebecca to die as they passed through the fires and into the brutal, inhuman digestive system of the false god. Rebecca felt a great deal of the burning and tearing and destroying that her body had to go through to be processed. Weirdo Wagoner raised up from his bow. He stood, brushing off his black suit. He turned and faced the audience, who were still prostrate. He turned up into a master of ceremonies double smile and stretched out his arms. He grabbed the mic.
Well, folks, that's our show. Give it up for our participants.
The crowd gave one last standing ovation, having been given a fully satisfactory evening of entertainment. The surviving participants stood and bowed and pointed and nodded their heads over at the now empty human leather seats next to them. They all smiled.
Good night, one and all, and happy Halloween.
Weirdo Wagoner yelled out his final send-off, raising both arms high and beaming out his best three-eyed, two-nosed, and two-mouthed grin. The crowd cheered and cheered. The following morning, a group would be sent out to the woods to find the gruesome remains of Mike and Rebecca Gladley, along with poor Zach Easton. As per tradition, Zach would be made into his own chair. Mike and Rebecca would be formed together, stitched right down the middle into theirs. The leather would be treated with mink oil and would be kept up carefully. They would join the other chairs on stage year after year, a crude memorial, immortalizing them as legends of the Halloween Karaoke Night Spectacular.
I hope you enjoyed Halloween Karaoke Night Spectacular, as written by Sam Morris and performed by Kevin Barbare, Beth Gadow, and Olivia Steele. On to the shows. Otis Gyrie and Kevin Barbare have their very own show here on our network, Scary Stories Told in the Dark, which you can hear every Sunday night. We also have Erik Peabody's Horror Hill, a podcast dedicated to some of our deeper and darker tales. We hope you check him out. And Drew Blood's Dark Tales airs Fridays, featuring some southern down-home horror. And don't forget to check out The Fear from the Heartland Archives, featuring more than 120 episodes. And don't forget, we have our own book out. Since 2012, Chilling Tales for Dark Nights has been keeping people awake through the night with terrifying audio renditions of tales from the darkest minds modern memory has to offer. Now, in this first of 3 volumes, collected are 30 tales, never before available by some of the most prolific and talented authors of the online community. Each one accompanied by a suitably grim illustration by David Romero. Strange cats, body mutilations, demonic apartments, revenge from beyond the grave, and yes, even a man-eating monster or two. All of these and more beckon you further into the darkness. Turn off the lights and turn on the dark indeed. Who needs sleep anyway? Check it out today by visiting www.chillingbook.com. Want your business to be a part of our show? Contact Natalie at chillingtalesfordarknights.com. You all came together beautifully when we were in need, and now we want to give back. For a limited time, we are offering our services, platform, and talents to write about your business. Specialize in spooky merch? Do you make teas? Have a house cleaning business, or just open an extermination service? Hit us up. We would love to share your company with our listeners while also curating a special tale for your business that will live on forever in your hearts, minds, souls, and maybe even a dark corner of your closet. Just a tiny one. We won't take up too much room. Well, friends, our weekly descent into the depths has just about come to a close. But before we go, I'd like to take a moment to thank you for joining us for tonight and remind you to take a moment to stop by our iTunes page and leave Chilling Tales for Dark Nights a 5-star review and a kind word. And follow us on Facebook, X, and Instagram if you haven't already. And of course, subscribe to us on YouTube, where you can find an archive of our work going back to 2012. And consider signing up as a patron at our website, chillingtalesfordarknights.com, to show your support and get all of our content ad-free. I'm your host of the evening, Steve Taylor, and it's been a pleasure. Tune in again next week when we once again turn off the lights and turn on the dark. Sweet dreams, listener. Sweet dreams.
Chilling tales for dark nights.